Hi, everybody. Welcome to my All Things Aviation and Aerospace Father's Day special. I'm Vince Mickens. Let me begin by wishing all of the dads a happy Father's Day. I am up in New York, actually, on Roosevelt Island, friends' home, to do this broadcast. So I've been up here all week doing all kinds of aviation stuff. I was live from the Vaughn College Aeronautics and Technology School, which is across the street actually from LaGuardia Airport. I have a real neat view of LaGuardia Airport, and it's a really great college for what they do with the different types of programs that they provide, including a master's in aviation management, but they have the A&P course, and they have several technology courses not directly related to aviation. Well, one's related, and that would be in terms of UAVs, but they also have a robotics course and things like that. They do robotics competitions. Anyhow, it was a great day that I spent there at Vaughn College. And then yesterday I was at the NBAA regional at White Plains at Westchester, and they had quite the turnout, even though things got busted up a little bit in the afternoon with some rain. But nevertheless, the turnout was great. It was a great display of aircraft on the static display out on the ramp, and they had more booths than you could keep up with. So it's been a lot of fun, but I couldn't let this week go by without doing something in reference to Father's Day, and more specifically, aviation dads like myself. So I am the proud dad of 3 beautiful daughters. They're intelligent, incredible, and they are also responsible for the gray hairs that you see on my head. No, I'm kidding. They all started flying with me as toddlers, so I had to put car seats in the plane and give them the kiddie headsets that actually worked. Of course, I had to put the headsets in cabin mode only because otherwise I might hear something like, "Daddy, Daddy, look at those planes out there," as I'm getting instructions from air traffic control. Quick story. So I used to take my girls out on the ramp and to pre-flight the aircraft with me. And well, I did that one time. And after we finished the pre-flight, buckled up, got in, cranked the engine, one of the ramp guys signaled me to cut my engine. And then he calmly walked over to my cockpit window and he said, "Sir, your nose wheel chock is still in place." So I was a little bit embarrassed. I'm pretty meticulous about checklists and safety and procedures and stuff. But, I just had a simple decision. I said, next time I keep them in the FBO until after I finish the pre-flight. Then I do a walk around and kind of a pretend pre-flight, or as I like to think of it, a third walk around the aircraft for them to be a part of it. But it was just, I was like, one little distraction and there you go. My girls are now grown, doing other things, and none of them in aviation, but I'm hoping that maybe eventually they'll all get their private pilot's license. So what's extra special about doing this show today is that my guests are what I call aviation dads whose sons also work in aviation. I will say that of all of the dads whose sons and daughters work in aviation and aerospace, I could have easily done a 5-part special because there are a number that are doing that. But it's going to be a lot of fun to talk about it and talk about the experiences and what it's meant for these dads and their sons, and in some cases, other members of their families to work in aviation. So looking forward to that in celebration of dads, Father's Day. So to represent all of those aviation dads and aviation sons out there, let me introduce my guests. First, my dear friend and aviation colleague, Jeff Smith. Besides being the consummate professional helicopter pilot, Jeff is the helicopter chief pilot for R.O.P. Aviation, located in Morristown, New Jersey. He is also the current chair of the board of the Helicopter Association International, HAI, and he has served in leadership roles for the Eastern Region Helicopter Council, as well as done a lot with NBAA that I mentioned earlier, the National Business Aviation Association. And I told you about the forum that took place. So as it turns out, yesterday, Jeff's son, Jack, got called for duty today to fly. So his son flies a Gulfstream 650ER. That's an amazing aircraft. But Jeff was kind enough to go ahead and join us anyhow. And Jeff's getting ready to fly, and he's hoping that he makes it all the way through the show before they call him out to fire up and get going. So, Jeff, it's really great to have you as part of this salute to aviation fathers and their sons. Also with us are I call them my newest Coast Guard buddies. I have a lot of respect for the U.S. Coast Guard and what it does for our country. I think they do amazing things. So I'm a really big fan. So I couldn't have had a better Father's Day military representation, so to speak, than first I'll introduce the dad, Thomas King. He's a retired Coast Guard captain. He's president of LuftKing AeroSolutions, which is an aviation consulting firm. And with him is his son, who is currently active duty in the Coast Guard, Captain Jared King, whose current responsibilities include, ready to write this down, being the acting deputy director of acquisition programs, the chief of aviation acquisition, and the assistant program executive officer. I'd say he's keeping a little bit busy. He says he's flying a desk, which he'd prefer to probably sometimes be out there and be up in the air. To round things out, joining us is Dennis Hayes. Dennis is a commercial pilot and certified flight instructor. He's a passionate aviator, and he's an aircraft owner. He owns a Mooney, which is a great aircraft. And he also works in the IT sector, his day job. Along with him is his son, who we won't be able to see because he has to do audio only, Austin. So Austin Hayes is a professional pilot. He currently flies the Lear 45s and 75s for a Part 135 charter operator. Gentlemen, welcome to All Things Aviation Aerospace. Welcome to this Father's Day special. So great to have you guys with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we've had a lot of fun, as one could expect, talking before we even went live with just things that aviators talk about and things like that. So I'm going to nod to who I will consider the senior of the room, Tom King. Tom, you're retired U.S. Coast Guard. You're a retired U.S. Coast Guard aviator. How about we just kind of start out and telling us about how the Coast Guard even came about, how you got interested in aviation, and what that was like?
Well, I first got interested in aviation at age 3. My uncle, who was a flight instructor during World War II, my dad and I had gone over to pick him up from work. And while we were there, he said, "You want to go up for a ride?" So I was only 3. Dad and I climbed in, and it absolutely floored me the once or twice around the pattern that my uncle, who I had only seen at family gatherings, here this guy is flying an aircraft. And man, the long run down the runway, the takeoff, the houses got smaller. It was a thrill for a 3-year-old. And I thought, man, I wonder if I could do that too. At age 7, Mom and Dad took my sister and I to the Smithsonian. I marveled at the Wright Flyer and the Spirit of St. Louis back when they were in the old Smithsonian Arts and Industries building. Movies like Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines attracted me to early aviation.
So you were locked in.
Oh, yeah. I think it was always there. I went to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. Second class year, they give you 2 weeks of aviation indoctrination at the Aviation Training Center in Mobile, Alabama. And at that time, Coast Guard Academy graduates first went to sea before they did anything else. So I was on a large high-endurance cutter out of New York City, Governor's Island. And I think those months doing North Atlantic patrols, fisheries patrols in the North Atlantic in the wintertime really made me think hard about going to aviation flight training, which I did at Pensacola back in the 75, 76. And it was just pure exhilaration. The first takeoff, I was thrilled. In fact, my first solo, it was so buzzing that I forgot to raise the landing gear until I was about 5 minutes out. I mean, it goes with what you were saying about the nose wheel being chocked. And it was so doggone embarrassing. And how do I explain that? The only thing I can think to say was, I tried to do that.
Yeah. What were you training in?
At that time, they were T-34s, T-28s.
It was a T-34. Okay. So you guys had the same training as everybody else that goes to Pensacola.
We had started in T-34, then T-28, and that was about 120 hours of fixed wing, then to the Jet Ranger, and then to the Huey. My first aviation assignment was Coast Guard Air Station Chicago, where I learned the true definition of cold. Which
Chicago will do that every friggin' time.
I know. The first night in Chicago, I got there and checked in, and the guy on the radio said the temperature outside was minus 15, wind chill minus 34. So if you go outside, be sure to wear a sweater. And I thought the guy was kidding, which he was, but I mean, it was cold, but it prepared me for my next aviation assignment, which was in what we call our Polar Operations Division. I made 3 polar deployments to the Arctic and Antarctica.
So what did you fly? I'm sorry, what did you fly in Chicago?
The Sikorsky HH-52 Alpha.
Okay.
Yeah, floats on the side, sponsons on the side.
Gotcha.
And that's what I flew in polar operations. I was in the aviation detachment, deployed to Antarctica and the Arctic. 4 years at Cape May. Then I was on the Coast Guard aviation staff at headquarters as the first platform manager for the new H-65. At that time, it was Aerospatiale.
Mm-hmm.
And HH-65 Alpha. I went from there to Air Station New Orleans, then to Brooklyn. I was the commanding officer at Brooklyn. Always mindful of all the historic things that happened at Coast Guard Air Station Brooklyn. Frank Erickson, Coast Guard Aviator #1, helicopter pilot #1, performed the first helicopter life-saving mission there in, I think, 44. First ASW aviation deployments out of Coast Guard Air Station Brooklyn. It was a tremendous place to be.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, flying around New York City, your head's constantly on a swivel.
Absolutely. But I also just that's the biggest part that I admire about the Coast Guard. I mean, Coast Guard does a lot of great things, but in terms of flying, the way you guys fly those helicopters for rescue missions is absolutely mind-blowing. I look at some of the videos sometime and I'm like, that's some serious skill. And I say a couple of bad words with it, but it's really impressive. Jared, what was happening with you while Dad was doing all these things?
So one of my earliest memories was my dad mentioned Chicago was being a kid walking on the hangar deck there. And so Coast Guard air stations are similar to how EMS is set up. So you always have someone on watch. And so on duty nights, as they call them, a lot of times my mom and I would come in. I was just a little guy, come in, and I remember playing there in the wardroom, and then walk around on the hangar deck and seeing the helicopters and everything. But I'll be honest, I was always around Coast Guard helicopter aviation, but that's not what inspired me to go the route that I went. I had the G.I. Joe F4 or Sky Striker, which was basically an F-14 Tomcat with a little switch on the top.
Yeah, I have one.
and I was like, this is the coolest thing in the whole wide world. And then Top Gun came out, and then it was the deal was sealed, and I was doing it. But then they phased the F-14 out. I was like, what am I going to do now? So it was all about I decided I want to fly the F-15 for some reason. That's the one I switched to from the F-14. And I was all about the Air Force Academy and what do I need to do to get into that. And I caught wind. My dad actually, he never pressured me, never pushed me, but he caught wind of a program that happens the summer between your junior year and senior year at the Coast Guard Academy, where you spend a week there and kind of see what it's all about. It's like a mini boot camp. Parts of it is. And I got really sold on the humanitarian aspect of training to do what you'll do on a regular basis, as opposed to training to do something that you hope you never have to do. Not absolutely nothing
against those guys, but I hear you loud and clear on that one.
Yeah. So I just kind of fell into the Coast Guard Academy, and then when I got to flight school, I thought the helicopter thing seemed interesting, and I just the I ended up flying the same helicopter that my dad was flying after they upgraded from the H-52 to the H-65. So I ended up spending the majority of my flying time in the H-65. And a funny story is that the Coast Guard has a program that if you are an Eagle Scout or basically they are allowed to take you up on a flight, because the Coast Guard, it's not just Eagle Scouts, but if you've achieved a high level in different organizations as a high schooler, you can actually get on a flight, and they're allowed to take you up. So I did that as a high school student, and when my son made Eagle Scout, a friend of mine reached out to me and said, "Hey, you should take Ethan. You should bring Ethan down. We'll take him on a flight and whatnot." I was like, you know what? That's actually a good idea, because right now I'm in DC, like you had mentioned earlier. And so we went down to Mobile, Alabama, on one of the days when there's a teacher work day, and I talked to the people who were setting it up, and I said, "Hey, not to look a gift horse in the mouth, but I see on your that different aircraft that you have are these, they had 10 different helicopters." And I said, I looked at my logbook, I looked at my dad's logbook, and found one that we had both flown, and we were able to pull it off where he his fan flight was in that, it's a 6558. And so there's now 3 generations of Kings have flown in the same piece of metal and whatnot. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I was going to ask your dad, Dad, seeing your son go this route and what he does and everything in the Coast Guard now, what's that like for you, and what's your take on that? You have to be proud, I know.
Well, certainly proud. I'm living my life vicariously through Jared. Something that keeps coming back to me is that when you're on the duty section at a Coast Guard air station, frequently your family will come in the evenings and bring supper, and sit and socialize a bit until you have to get back to work. And one time when Jared was stationed at Air Station Miami years back, he was a lieutenant and he was the senior duty officer. And we were sitting in the wardroom. We had brought some chow for him, and he got a call from the operations center. There was a case brewing. And I'm listening to his end of the conversation, the questions he was asking, and talking about the weather and what the mission was going to be. And I'm listening. And I wanted to ask questions too, but I knew my place was to sit there and be quiet. And after he got off the phone, he hung up the phone and he looked at me and he said, "It's just killing you, isn't it?" And it was.
I can only imagine, that's a pretty good story. While we're in the helicopter world, speaking of rotor heads, Jeff is about as much of a rotor head as you could possibly be. If you looked in the Webster, if you looked in the encyclopedia, there's definitely a picture of him next to a helicopter or in a helicopter. He's also a good friend. Jeff, you started in the military also, in the Army.
I did. The Army way back when, in 1987.
But what influenced you to even go that route? Where did the flying interest come to you?
Well, I was a senior in high school in 1986, and I'm first generation. In fact, I couldn't have been more opposite from my dad, because he was also Army, but he was air defense. So he was shooting things down, and I wanted to go in the aviation. So it's probably the incidence of our relationship. But actually, it's comical and it's very cliche. But Top Gun did it for me. Top Gun came out in '86. I went and saw it. I didn't know what I wanted to. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I thought that was cool. I mean, very cool, landing on an aircraft carrier. So my dad took me to the Navy recruiter and said, I said, "Hey, I want to go in and I want to fly jets off carriers." And he goes, "Great. What college are you going to go to?" I said, "I'm not going to go to college. I just want to go fly jets and land on aircraft carriers." He goes, "Well, the Navy's not for you because you have to have a 4-year degree before you go into aviation. And it's a typical recruiting center. It's one of those little strip malls with all the different forces that, just go down, shop where you want to go. And he actually said, why don't you go next door to the Army? Because they actually have a high school to flight school program where they'll take you right, if you have good grades and you can, put a packet together, they'll put you right out of high school into flight school. I said, well, that sounds good to me. Being that my dad was retired E8, we went next door. It was very by happenstance that the senior recruiter was a senior E7, was the only one in the office. And I went in and asked the question, and my dad and the recruiter started having conversations, and they've crossed paths before in their careers. So my whole existence for being there, I was pretty much put to the side while they had this 2-hour conversation about their time in the Army. But because of that conversation, I really had somebody that took care of me, got my packet done, and the rest is history. I went to basic at Fort Leonard Wood in '87, and then to Mother Rucker and went all the way through Aviation Aerospace School, where I spent 10 years in the Army.
Yeah. And how did that translate to civil after you did the 10 years in the Army?
So it's a funny story is I actually applied for the DCA program because I want to go fly in the Coast Guard, but I had 30 days in the government's wisdom, I had 30 days of too much time of active duty to be able to do that. So, and I couldn't get a waiver. So I got out of the Army and I went, I was getting a divorce at the time, and I had 2 little kids, one of them being Jack, he was 2 years old. My wife at the time was still in the military. She got stationed actually in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. So I moved up there, started looking around. It was a very interesting conversation with a guy that he had a tour company, and he says, we don't hire Army people. We don't hire Army guys. We don't hire Army guys usually, and we don't hire anybody that doesn't have New York time. And I'm sure most of the people on this call understand what that New York time means, because it's a very complex piece of airspace.
Absolutely.
So it just so happened, he goes, well, I said, so why can you help me on my resume? And he goes, sure, I'll help you on the resume. And we started talking. Next thing you know, he said, yeah, I talked to my buddies, but I think we're going to give you a shot. So in 1997, I started doing tours in A-Stars up and down the Hudson River, showing everybody the Statue of Liberty and Empire State Building. And, even back then, I have great pictures of me in front of the World Trade Center, both towers. So,
yeah. So
I did that. And I'm a Texas boy. So I said, I didn't even know where New Jersey was actually when I was doing all this. So I said, I'm coming to New Jersey, but I'm not staying here. And here I am 26 years later.
You mentioned Jack. So Jack was, when did he indicate that he would have an interest in aviation?
I actually beat him up all the way through high school, and he didn't seem that that's the direction he wanted to go. Now, he'd been in helicopters and airplanes a lot during his childhood, because anytime he came to visit, he moved on, and they moved on and went to lived in Maine. So when he came down to visit me, we were always in a helicopter doing something. We're either flying in the city, we're going to the Yankees games. We had a lot of access. He had a lot of access. In fact, I have a great picture. I wish I had given it to you, but I went on to manage a AS365 Dolphin for a charter company, and I have a lot of time with me and him, and him sitting in the left seat. So he'd seen it a lot, but he never really showed that he wanted to go into aviation until he started, very similar to me, he started trying to figure out what he wanted to do in life. And he actually enlisted in the Army Reserves coming out of high school to be a Black Hawk mechanic. So right out of high school, he went to, I got him a job because he needed a job for the summer. I got him a job out in East Hampton, working as a ramp person, loading and offloading airplanes, fueling them, cleaning out the lab, all the fun duties that working at an FBO. He went to AIT, and when he came back, because he was in reserves, he had money to go to school and all those kind of things. He says, I want to be a pilot. And so he enrolled in ATP flight school right there in Morristown. He moved into my basement, and 8 months later, he was a commercial multi-engine pilot. So it kind of evolved into it, and now it's him and all of his buddies. That's what they want to do. I think you see it, and then you understand it, and it really gives that drive. And I think that's why stuff like what we're doing today is very important for the young kids to see that it's doable.
Absolutely, it is very important. And I was going to kind of piggyback off what you were saying and say that's the stories that you guys are telling today are just what young people need to hear, because everybody goes different routes, and none of us end up taking the route we originally thought or had planned to. Things just happen, and they, I was just thinking of a couple of pilots I talked to who became a pilot in the Air Force, and the next thing you know, they were flying Air Force One. Well, they didn't go in the Air Force saying, I want to fly Air Force One. They just wanted to be a good pilot, and it ended up happening that way, both on the Air Force One and Marine One, the helicopter side as well. It just happened to parallel on that. But yeah, this is absolutely to inspire the upcoming generation and to give them some ideas of what they're addressing and dealing with and that type of thing. One other thing I wanted to mention with you, I had a question for you first, Jeff, and that is, how did your son end up in a 650 ER? How did that transition happen?
Well, hustle. First and foremost, hustle. But CAE Flight has a center in Whippany, New Jersey, which is about, at the time when he was living in my house, it was about a 30-minute drive. And they have a program where they will hire 400, 500-hour pilots for their supplemental crew program, where they'll train them in the airplane, they'll put them in the right seat, because they sometimes have clients that are coming through to do captain recurrence and stuff like that need to sit in the left seat, but they don't have the instructors, and sometimes the companies don't send crews at a time. So they augment that with these I would say student pilots. And what they would do is after 82 or 86 sim periods, they'll actually type them in the airplane that they're flying. So that's what he did, and he did it. And he just had his 28th birthday, and he's typed in the G4, the G5, the G6, the Global, and also the Falcon 2000 Classic.
Wow, that's really impressive. You've got to be proud of that.
I am over proud, and but watching it and it was a lot of hustle and a lot of studying for him, but also that program is phenomenal. So just he lives in a house up in Lake Opakon. It's his house. He bought it, but he has 4 roommates. They actually call it the Fly House. All 5 of them are in aviation. They're all under 30 years old, and they all have jobs that are 6-figure jobs, living in that house and flying all over the world. One of them is which I could absolutely consider one of my sons, is 21 years old. He's typing the 550, and he's in Maldives right now, and he's making really good money. Yeah, wow. It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing what's out there right now, because I can tell you for everybody that's on this call that is my age, we didn't have it that good. It was hard finding jobs when I was his age. In fact,
yeah. Well, and the other point that you brought up earlier, which I always like to emphasize too, is in terms of different paths. So, yes, college, academies, et cetera, can be paths for many, but also some people that's just not their thing. But it's really impressive to hear that your son, even though he decided to go a similar route to you, he still, look at his accomplishment, because it's not an easy thing to get type rated in the aircraft you just named. That's not a sleeper. That's a pretty big deal. Before I move on to Dennis and his son, Austin, I wanted to ask you, or I'd let you comment, Jeff. One of the things about you that got my attention when I first met you is you're a big advocate for this industry and an active one. You worked with the Eastern Regional Helicopter Council. You're now chair at Helicopter Association International, which is a great advocacy. It's the advocacy group for helicopters. And you've also done a lot of things with NBAA, the National Business Aviation Association, all advocacy related in dealing with, a lot of issues, speaking of New York, that helicopters deal with. Can you just talk about that for a sec?
Well, sure. I always believed I've had it very good in aviation, and I always believed in giving it back. So I started with the Eastern Region Helicopter Council about 20, I think it was 20 years ago. I was actually just a member, and then I didn't think that a lot of things were happening. So I actually wanted to get inside the inside behind the green curtain to see what was happening. So I ran for the board, and 2 years later, I became the chair. And in my first year as the chair, we had a midair in the Hudson River between the Lancer and a helicopter, and a good friend of mine died. And I was immediately asked to come to Washington, D.C. and be part of the New York task force for the redesign of the special flight rules area over the Hudson. So I really got involved. I really met a lot of really good people. I was meeting with Matt Zuccaro from HAI was part of the task force. Rob Hackman used to be it. I know from NBAA. Yes. He was my counterpart on the task force, and a lot of wonderful, beautiful people from the FAA trying to get together to figure out, how to enhance the safety of aviation around the Hudson, and we spent a great time doing that. But during that, is when I really learned that we have to have people that are actually doing the business involved in the future of the industry, because there has to be everybody's different experience to make sure that everything was great. And I got a lot out of that, and I never stopped since. So yeah, it's been a path. I'm very much in the government affairs piece. New York is constantly getting battered by legislation over noise and safety and stuff like that. And it really propelled me into wanting to be on the board for HAI, and it's my fourth year, and I was very lucky for my peers to nominate me to be the chair, and it's been a wonderful experience traveling the world. By the way, it's we're an international advocacy organization, so I got to see a lot of stuff globally.
Awesome. So we have a mom actually who just sent in a question, and I think it's great for the panel to be able to kind of address this. She has a son interested in aviation, and she sounds like a typical mom who is concerned about the safety and wonder what kind of advice you guys would have about being protective of, or how, I guess the way I'm putting words in her mouth. What the essence of her question is, how protective of your sons when they were little and young and coming up into the industry, and concerns that you might have had. And I see Dennis, who we were going to go to anyhow. Go ahead, Dennis.
Well, I would say I was more comfortable with my son flying than I was driving. In fact, he soloed an airplane. He soloed an airplane the day after his 16th birthday, but I had to drive him to the airport because he still didn't have a driver's license. So the government figures he was safe enough to go fly that airplane around the very busy airspace around Minneapolis, no problem, but they wouldn't trust him with a car. Yeah.
Anyone else have perspective on that, about being protective of your sons when they were younger?
Vince, you had mentioned at the beginning of the program that you were very clear that your three daughters were not responsible for your gray hairs. I can honestly say that Jared was not responsible for my gray hairs. White hair goes in the family. I got to echo what was said earlier. If knowing the rigor of Coast Guard aviation and our training, that if the instructors were satisfied with Jared, then certainly I would be too. But I felt a responsibility to the parents of all of our people in Coast Guard aviation to ensure that we had the best possible program, best possible training, best possible risk management program, which was very important. No, I was very satisfied with it. And I always knew from when Jared was young that he always had his stuff together. He always knew what he was about.
Yeah. Jeff, I see you nodding in agreement.
No, I agree. In fact, my wife and I always were in disagreement. She was much more protective. In fact, when Jack and I and his sister used to go fly when they come to visit, it was our pinky promise that we wouldn't let her know, because she would really have a big problem with it. the aviation, just go back, the aviation industry is the safest mode of transportation. It really is. People don't think, there's a lot of bad stories and the myths about not being regulated. And, people don't understand things like uncontrolled airspace, which means, nobody's paying attention. But, we're heavily regulated. There's a lot of overwatch. And honestly, because of things that, just the industry itself is pretty expensive. So when you get down in training, insurance, premiums, that kind of stuff, we actually police ourselves pretty well because somebody else's actions have a direct effect on whether you can do your job or not. So we police ourselves very well. But I would just tell them that, with bringing up your kids, just that gut instinct is very important. If they feel that something's unsafe, then they need to speak up. This is not the aviation of 25 years ago where you had to cower, those kind of feelings or you lose your job. The safety culture in aviation right now is very good from the top to the bottom. And I think just, speaking up when they see something unsafe that would be my advice.
Yeah, kind of going back to something Dennis said, I've always told people that I have a better chance of having an accident going to the airport and coming from the airport than I do flying an aircraft. Interesting sidebar to that. My wife won't let me own a motorcycle. And she's like, no, I don't want you to get out there and get killed. She goes, you can fly airplanes and helicopters, whatever, but no motorcycle. And I'm like, wow, that's an interesting perspective on things. Before I go to you, Dennis, and your son, Austin, I wanted to, in terms of what we were talking about, I had a guest on a while back that he does aerobatics and competitive and air shows and things like that, Anthony Oshanuga. And he said that his mom said that she didn't want him to fly in the military. She wanted him to have absolutely nothing to do with flying. And he always wanted to fly, an F-15 or whatever. He wanted to be a jet jockey. And his mom said no. Now he's flying upside down and doing all kinds of aerobatic stuff. And I'm like, so how's mom feel about that? And have you taken her up yet? So the answer to that is no. But anyhow, Dennis, you have an interesting general aviation background, and you're clearly passionate about it. So tell us how that got started, and then we'll bring Austin in. Again, his son Austin is with us, but he's audio only, so that's why you're not seeing anything on screen. Dennis?
So my general aviation experience actually started at age 15 when I took an introductory flight, and then I kind of was passionate about it. I read everything I could about it, but it wasn't until I was in college. I was actually a member of the Minnesota Air National Guard, and one of my coworkers had his pilot's license and offered to take me up for a ride to get some pictures for an art class in college. And that set a whole bunch of wheels in motion. It, set the hook fully on I love to fly. It turns out that there was an opportunity to become a backseat pilot on the F4s at Duluth, and I was selected for that. So here I'm now having to get out of college halfway through, and what am I going to do for the summer until I can go to flight school? I wound up going to work at that FBO, got my private pilot license before I went to officer training and navigator school. Unfortunately, the military didn't work out for me. They got rid of the F4 and put the F-16 in, and navigators have to hang off the rudder. So I took a different path and went back into school and finished up an IT career, because I think you guys mentioned back in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have it so good as the kids do today. And, when they're paying first officers, $5,000-$6,000 a year to fly for a commuter, that didn't seem like a career option for me. And so I just kept the passion of flying privately. Then later on when I had kids, I kept them involved with it. Austin's been flying with me since he was 6 weeks old. He could hold the airplane straight and level and on headings at age 5, which was handy because I was having to deal with my wife and daughter in the back seat of the airplane who weren't enjoying it as much as we were up front.
And totally relate to that.
So yeah, that's how that all happened. And he's found out Austin soloed an airplane, at age 16, and he's been, going through the college aerospace program after high school, and is now, he's a second officer or second in command on a Lear 75 near here in Naples. So it's really come a long way for him.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Austin, you with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your perspective as growing up with a dad who was passionate about aviation and you being exposed to it and how that has brought you forward.
So like I like to say I was the planes, trains, and automobiles kid. Like if it was in the air on a railroad track, I was interested. Like it was so cool. But I could like pick out the difference between a airplane and a jet when I was like a kid, and I would correct people. There's a whole bunch of stories about that. And like growing up, we had to go do the 90-day currency. I would always want to ride with, just to go do 3 laps around the pattern. That was like the highlight of my day if I could get to do that.
So you were passionate about it early on.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I always knew that I wanted to at least get like my private pilot license. And through high school, I became really passionate about like the engineering practice. So I was like, why not combine the two things together? I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. The problem is I hate math. So it was like
small requirement.
Small requirement. Yeah. So let's just do this flying thing. So finished up high school, went into pretty much the local like university 141 flight program. And I had already had my private pilot going into that university program. So finished up all the rest of my ratings, graduated with a degree in professional aviation. And then things happened, moved to Florida, flight instructed here in Florida, and now I'm flying a Learjet.
Yeah. So you went from flight instructing to the Lear, or was there a bit of a transition? And I'm only asking that because a lot of young people, that's one of their big questions is, how do you get to points like that? How do you get to fly a Learjet at some point?
I mean, really, the secret is knowing people, right? But I went right from flight instructing to flying a Learjet. And one of my previous coworkers, colleagues, whatever you want to call it, got this job flying Learjets. And I just sent her a message like, wow, I hit 1,000 hours, hooray. And it was, do you want a job? It was like, oh, okay, things are happening. Whoa, this is getting real now.
Yeah. And so you've been flying the 45 and the 75, right?
Yep.
Yeah. For how long?
About 6 months now.
Yeah. Dennis, seeing your son progress like that and now flying Learjets and doing what he does, tell us how you look at that.
You really want to know?
I really want to know.
1, I'm proud, and 2, I'm jealous. Because he's,
there's the real dad coming out.
Yeah, no, I wish I could follow in his tracks. He has a career ahead of him that I could never have imagined, when he graduated from high school. They talked about a pilot shortage, but to see it truly materialize and see how pilots are truly being compensated now and what a excellent career option it is. I am just, I'm ecstatic for him because I know he's going to do great things, in the future. I mean, look, he's 24 years old and flying a Learjet. Right. I was 24 years old and could barely fly a 150. That's all they'd let me borrow at the airport.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that one. Totally. And I also get it about what you wanted to do. Like you mentioned, you were going the military route, and then that kind of, changed on you in terms of your path with that. When I was in high school, I wanted to be I wanted to do what Jeff wanted to do. I wanted to land and take off aircraft carriers. So I wanted to be a naval aviator, and my glasses kept that from happening. Of course, now you can get your eyes fixed with laser surgery and still make the qualifications, but you had to have uncorrected 20/20 back in the day. So that took care of my flying career as far as the Navy was concerned. I was going to ask you, I'm sorry, a question popped up on my screen and I got distracted with it. I was going to ask you about actually ask all of you this question. So as we get to the latter part of the show here, one of the things that I like to kind of do is go around and ask everybody what their advice is from all the things that you experience. I want to hear it from the dad's perspective and from the son's perspective, to young people that are interested in an industry that is really blossoming right now, both all overall, but particularly in aerospace, actually in every aspect. I shouldn't just pinpoint one area. The industry is doing a lot of things. So with that, what are some of the things that you recommend that folks consider? And that includes their parents who don't know. A lot of parents don't know about our industry, but they have kids that are interested. So they're kind of challenged with how do they find out more things? How do they get their kids engaged and things like that? And I always ask this question, and a lot of the answers are the same, but usually somebody comes up with something that we haven't talked about. So I open the floor to you guys on that.
Well, Austin had already said it. It's, in aviation, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And so if someone's passionate about aviation, go out to the airport, go talk to people, introduce yourself, become familiar, because the connections that you make there will surprise you later. Austin moved from Minnesota to Fort Myers because I packed up and moved the whole family because we found a house on an air park, and that has been my dream. So we moved the whole family to Florida. Austin comes down here and needs to find a job at a flight school. Well, it happened to be through, I knew a guy that ran a aviation business. He happened to know an owner of a flight school, and that helped grease the skids of getting a resume through quicker. And then that connection obviously then led to his coworker getting him a job in a Learjet. So the connections that you make, that networking, is extremely valuable. The people are out there. People want to help you succeed, and you can't do it alone.
Yeah. Jared, as a Coast Guard aviator, your perspective.
For getting into aviation, so I mean, it's a little, you need to, like was mentioned earlier, in order to get into Coast Guard aviation, you need to be in the Coast Guard. Joining, but I would imagine it's similar for any of the services that, get in there and get into the organization and apply. I guess one thing I wanted to point out when military training, or just aviation training in general, is that there's no substitute for knowing the material. You can get into the aircraft and have a hard time with the maneuvers. You'll figure that out eventually through over time and repeating it over and over again. But knowing the material and having that cold in case that if there is any kind of malfunction that happens, it's second nature. You're not trying to draw on it. So I would say somebody who's aspiring to go into aviation, really, when you get that material and you start your path, really learn it, not just read it, but learn it so it's second nature to you when you need it.
Gotcha. Somebody else was about to jump in. Was that you, Austin?
Yeah. Speaking as a flight instructor, to add on to that, the most important thing is to know the material, 100%. Yeah. So if you're already learning to fly, make sure you put in the effort and actually do it, and it'll pay off. But if you're trying to get say your kid or whatever interested in aviation, bring them to an air show. That's the number one way to spark it. I think that's really what sold it for me, seeing all the jets, warbirds, everything going overhead. And also, if you're trying to get a foot into the industry, get those connections that you really need to further your career, go to your local busy BizJet airport and get a job working line there. I worked 5 years working line at a really busy reliever airport in the Minneapolis area. And I did a ton of hangar flying and, schmoozing, whatever you want to call it, with people, and got to fly so many airplanes that I would have never had the opportunity to otherwise.
Do you guys think it makes a difference that all of you had your dads as, that were already in aviation as some influence? In other words, do you think it would have been different if your dads weren't aviators?
Oh, it would have been, for sure.
Yeah. I bring that up because I think that is the case in a lot of scenarios where you have, again, I mentioned parents. You have parents whose kids are interested, maybe they go to an air show and they get that spark of interest, but then they don't know the next step, and the parents don't know the next step in terms of what to do. So I think some of the advice that you're giving along those lines is really great. I actually think of the same thing, that kids really, whatever exposure they can get. I mean, I think all of us with the passion, I know, working out on the ramp, I did that when I was a teenager. In fact, I did anything to fly, basically. I was the one to say, oh, you're going to ferry an aircraft? Can I go? And things like that. So got in trouble a couple of times with my mom, who said, no, you're not going on that flight. You can't just get in a plane with strangers and go to Memphis. I was like, why not? But I was 12.
Yeah, Vince, I agree with you 100%. I think it's the exposure, right? So
right.
Like there was probably 80% of the population my age that had an F-14 Tomcat, Sky Striker, G.I. Joe Sky Striker, thought that was cool and wanted to do it one day. But it was the being able to walk on the hangar deck as a young child and seeing that, and just and seeing my dad fly over the house on his duty night and do a circle around the house. You're not allowed to do that.
Right.
Allegedly.
I never spoke on the loud.
It may or may not have happened, but yeah, is that constant, being around that's I can't attribute it to anything other than that. So
yeah. Tom,
I think the biggest thing is to be supportive. Just be supportive of your kids. If they do have an interest, help them with that. My parents had no aviation background. In fact, I actually got my father into aviation. He worked for Cirrus for 8 years because the hiring manager at Cirrus used to be the mechanic at the FBO I worked at when I got my pilot's license. Wow. So, my parents were always there to support what I wanted to do. And, here it goes. So grandpa all the way to grandson, my son is a Cirrus instructor. And dad built them, kind of a 3 generations, but we kind of went about it a different direction. Went from the middle out.
Yeah.
And Vince,
Tom, or Jeff, go ahead.
So I want to add on to that, because having 5 kids, 2 of them have graduated high school. I think it's fairly easy to get your child enthusiastic about aviation. In fact, they probably do it themselves. But my advice to the parents would be, don't be afraid. I mean, look, there's many ways to get into aviation, to be a pilot or a mechanic or whatever you want to do. And military is obviously a fantastic one because it's cheap, or it's free, if you want to call it that. But if the military is not the direction your child wants to go, don't be afraid of the sticker shock when you go into a flight school right off the bat and say, how much is this going to cost and stuff like that, because there are so many programs, financing, scholarships, and things like that.
Tons of scholarships.
Yeah, and honestly, I have a college degree, so I'm not knocking having a college degree. But coming out of high school, parents have to make very tough decisions about whether they want their kids to go to, college, or how are they going to pay for flight school? Can they do it both? And most people cannot do that. But I can tell you from a vocational side, and I do a lot of workforce development. From a vocational side, you're actually, the way aviation is set up right now, and the way the pilot shortage and the growth of aviation, the training the pilot not being able to keep up with the growth of aviation, you actually have a better chance of more bang for your buck having your kid go through aviation than you would going through college. So don't be afraid, is what I would have to tell you.
Yeah. Tom, I was going to go to you just to see what your thoughts were.
Well, Roger, all the above. You're all right. I Roger that. I would say for those of us, be accessible. When you sense someone who may be interested in it, reach out and be accessible, because nothing speaks volumes like experience. I had gotten, when I was the commanding officer of Coast Guard Air Station in Atlantic City, I had gotten a call from someone whose son was interested in being a Coast Guard aviator. So he lived in northern Pennsylvania, invited him down to Atlantic City, spent a lot of time with that young man. on the hangar deck talking about Coast Guard aviation. And that's exactly what I did. I forget his name right now. Jared and I were just talking about him a couple months ago. But yeah, he's a Coast Guard aviator now. And he said that the time that I had spent with him, not talking as a parent or an old guy, that old guy, was invaluable and helped him. Yeah, and to echo what Jeff and Jared both said, you got to know your stuff as an aviator. When Karen and I moved to Pensacola to start my flight school, the real estate agent took us around, was a former Navy flight instructor. And the last bit of advice he gave me was know your procedures. I had no idea what the man was talking about. What were procedures? What were they? I didn't know the term, but boy, I sure learned fast. Know your procedures and know them cold, because in the end, it's just you and what's between your ears it's going to save you.
So we have running out of time with this, but the theme of this is about saluting dads and in reference to Father's Day, but specifically to aviation and having your sons that actually work in aviation. And for those who have daughters that do that too, not excluding you, but I'm going with what we have on the show today. So I always like to kind of go around the room as we close out and just ask for, any final statement that you'd like to make about being a dad, having a son, and a son having a dad in aviation, both of you doing that professionally and things like that. Austin, I'm going to start with you.
Well, it was always a motivator because, forever I was one rating behind my dad going through my flight school. So it was always, all right, I'm going to catch up to him. And I finally caught up to him. I finally passed him in hours. So it's fun to have that kind of motivator. You have somebody that's in the industry and has helped you out, and you get to compete with them. Maybe that's just my personality, but.
Well, and on the other side of that, being able to share a cockpit with your son is really, truly something. I really value the time that we get to go fly in our Mooney together, whether it's to go get a hamburger or the Taco Tuesdays up in Arcadia, Florida. Even a quick little trip like that, just seeing how, how professional he is with flying, and how when he came back from his Learjet type rating, how different he was about checks and procedures and call outs and things like that. Just seeing that career progression going from that first solo at 15 to now, flying Learjets and being able to fly with him is it's a great for us. Absolutely. Jared?
Yeah, no, like I said before, I had no intentions of being a Coast Guard aviator, let alone a helicopter pilot. I just kind of feel like I followed my own path, and it ended up being very similar to my dad's. And I think that a lot of that was just based on the exposure. And I guess I want to really thank him for having that as a guiding beacon, if you will, because I definitely wouldn't change anything that I've done in my career. So,
yeah, Tom, Jared says thank you.
Thank you, Jared. I'll remember you at Christmas. My last flight in a Coast Guard aircraft, H-65, was probably the last month I was on active duty. I was the chief of Coast Guard Aviation for 3 years. And I was visiting Coast Guard Air Station San Francisco, where Jared was stationed. My last flight was doing a maritime security patrol with him. He was a right seater. I wasn't allowed to sit up front in the cockpit. That wouldn't have looked good. But I was in a jump seat right behind him, and doggone, we lost an engine. At that time, the H-65 didn't have enough power to hover on one engine, so they required a running landing. So listening to him and as professional as he was, it was just so totally textbook. As we're coming down out of the sky to land at Oakland, to do a running landing, we're coming down, the houses are getting bigger, the ground's approaching, and I look over at Jared and I'm thinking, I hope he doesn't have any grudges against me for all the times I yelled at him for not making his bed when he was a kid. And I always thought I was good at running landings, but he greased it right on. Good job, Jaron. So proud, and I love you.
Well,
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. So it looks like Jeff had to go fly, so he's gone. And but I want to thank all of you for taking the time to do this and this special tribute to Father's Day in aviation specific. So I wish the best to all of you, Dennis and Austin, Tom, Jarrett,
Yes.
Jeff, and your son Jack. Even though, as I said, Jeff is flying, I want to thank you guys very much for being a part of this.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was
Thank
fun.
you, Vince.
It's absolutely been a pleasure. And happy Father's Day to you guys.
Thank you, sir. You too.
I guess it would be good to do that too, since we're talking about that. All Things Aviation and Aerospace is an aviation career oriented show. I'd like you to ask that you please subscribe and follow. It is available on YouTube, the YouTube channel, Facebook, and LinkedIn under Private Air Media. It's also available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts on. But until next time, please take care, stay safe flying if you're a pilot in blue skies. And by the way, my show next week is on corporate catering. So it's actually about the folks that cater for private jets and that type of thing. It should be a lot of fun with that show as well. In the meantime, everybody stay safe. Wishing the best to everyone. Happy Father's Day and have a good one.